Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar on creating data pipelines with Kafka and CloverDX. Our presenter today is Calvin Cortez, our solutions engineer here at CloverDX, and he'll be discussing how CloverDX can help you work with data in Kafka and create comprehensive and auditable data pipelines. So a couple of housekeeping notes. Calvin will be answering questions at the end, so if you do have any, please just use the Q&A box to submit them. Also, we'll be sending out both the recording and the slides after the webinar, so look out for that. And I will hand over to Kelvin now.
Thank you so much, Tessa, and thank you all for joining me. Today, we're actually going to be talking about CloverDX and Kafka and how you can use the two to really utilize the power of Kafka while also joining in traditional ETL routes. And basically allowing you to use your data in new and more powerful ways. So with that, I'll start. So the first topic is, what exactly is Kafka? For those of you that are unfamiliar, Kafka is a distributed streaming platform essentially used to push and consume data in real time between different producers and consumers. So as you can see in this picture, essentially what you have is a cluster where you can have different applications or databases, for example, pushing all their data into a Kafka cluster and then having consumers that actually grab that data in real time. So it was actually originally developed by the developers over at LinkedIn, basically allowing the ideal scenario of a business to have all of your data from all your different applications available to every other system within that ecosystem. So it publishes and subscribes the streams of records. You can think of it as a message queue, if you will. And it's really ideal for pushing very large volumes of data to many sources and targets. So how exactly does this work? The base of Kafka is actually called Kafka topics. You can think of it as a feed or a category to which records are published. So you can think of, for example, I have an application that is pushing different types of data to different topics. You can selectively push different data. And then they can have different subscribers or consumers take each one of these data feeds as needed. So a topic can have 0, 1, or many consumers that subscribe to the data written to it. Right. So this is all really great, and it's really changed the way that we can think of real-time data streams and how we can push massive volumes of data. But there are a few limitations. So the biggest one is it doesn't really provide any real data wrangling capabilities. So a lot of the times when you're getting data from all your different applications, it's in no one consistent format. You kind of need to run maybe some sort of ETL process or data wrangling process or validation, for example, to take these raw messages and make them something usable for your actual environment. Another thing that we can think of is messages in this Kafka environments. These message queues, because we're pushing so much data, can become very clogged and slow. So very often they're purged from that actual environment after a certain amount of time. So if you don't use the message or you don't consume that sort of data, it'll be gone. So that's another thing to consider. The main point being that, we want to use this tool that's incredibly powerful, but we also want to make it as part of a comprehensive and auditable data pipeline. So how exactly do we do that is the real question that we should consider. The good news is that with CloverDX, you can think of it as a data management platform. We can design and build data pipelines to work with Kafka and CloverDX to kind of create that ideal scenario where you have massive volumes of data being pushed into different targets and from different sources, but also having the capabilities to enrich, clean, and validate that data as needed, and then actually push those to the appropriate targets in the formats that those targets require. So in our traditional world, that usually means maybe pushing to an application via an API, maybe a data warehouse, something along those lines, but translating these raw message queues into those APIs and data warehouses is the ultimate goal. and all the while doing this in something that's very manageable, easy to control, but also leveraging that power of Kafka. So you can kind of think of as CloverDX as this in between your Kafka queues or topics and your targets. Something that'll get you into the right format in a way that's easily traceable and easy to replicate. So we can achieve this in CloverDX using graphs and subgraphs. So graphs are just a visual representation of a data transformation using components. So in CloverDX, I'll show you in a moment, essentially we have our drag and drop components. We have readers, writers, things that can transform data along the way. The base of it being that we have some sort of source and some sort of target. And then within these graphs, we can have subgraphs, which are essentially a logical collection of components that encompass a more complex process. In this particular case, our complex process would be something like writing to and reading from a Kafka topic. So you can think of a subgraph, for example, in this slide. We have two components within the subgraph called aggregate and sorting. They are going to take input, run this process within that this subgraph, and then create the output. And it can be encapsulated into a subgraph that we can then reuse. So in our case, what we did is actually create subgraphs that we wrote to utilize Kafka capabilities and all in a piece of software that we can easily reuse as needed. So with these subgraphs, we can do something like writing to a topic, where we can actually take our traditional data formats like a database, a flat file, or an API, run it through our Kafka subgraph, and write it out to a topic in Kafka and have it be available on that particular topic. We can also read from a topic. So we actually have also made a subgraph that goes out to a topic, reads all the messages, and then is actually able to push that data to, again, your more traditional data formats, a database, a flat file, or an API. Now, this is something that's a little bit more complex, and I think something that can really give businesses the power to do something like dynamically transforming data. So essentially what we're doing here is reaching out to a topic, which has many different data formats, and parsing it through using CloverDX and dynamically rerouting that data to different targets using different transformations. And this is going to be the use case that I'm going to focus more on today. Essentially what we're going to be doing is this process of dynamically transforming data from one topic to many different targets. So through this demo, I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of context before we actually go into it. What we have here is a use case of a telecom company where we have a single Kafka topic that has cell data, router data, and antenna data. As you can see, they have this. This is going to be the metadata descriptions for each one of these different data sets. They have some common ones like timestamp and device type, but some of them are very unique to each one of these different devices. So packet sent would be a cell data, router data has status codes, antenna data has distance to a tower. So when we put them all into a topic, it'll be a bit more convoluted. We have to find some way to parse them out. But this particular use case, we're going to have a single Kafka topic with those three different data types that I had just described earlier. And we're going to take each one of those data types and route them to the appropriate ETL process. So for cell data, we're actually going to take that cell data and look up the regions. So there's metadata of regions expressed as numerics. And maybe for like reporting or analytics purposes, we want to look up that data and actually have the name of that region in string. So I'm going to go ahead and perform a lookup via database on that cell data and then send it to a database for analytics purposes, for example. For router data, we actually just want to take that data, get it into a standard columnized format, and then send it to an application via a payload via an HTTP connector or application. For antenna data, we're going to want to do some transformation. In my case that I'm going to show you guys in a second, it's actually an aggregation to do a simple report and then send that to a flat file in memory. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into CloverDX Designer to show you guys what that looks like and take you through that process. So this is our CloverDX design environment. Essentially what it is a way to design your different jobs. This is part of what we call a graph that I had described earlier. Essentially what we're doing here is using data generators to first write to a Kafka writer. And all these components, by the way, are drag and drop. Anything that you need done here in CloverDX, you essentially connect via ports and wire them together. We have different transformations here as well that you might find useful along the way. And you'll see a few of those later on. But here what we're doing is simply writing 3 different types of data to the same Kafka topic. And this is the actual subgraph that I had described to you guys earlier. It just has a host, a port, and a topic that we're writing to. And all of this, this component is actually custom made here. Essentially what we are doing is wrapping everything within this subgraph is actually this. There's going to be a universal data writer, a small piece of Java code that we're actually connecting to and utilizing the Kafka APIs to create this sort of connection with. And you can write this out into another universal data writer that'll eventually write it to that actual topic. So this is just to illustrate how you can have a much more complex process, but that maybe, for example, you'd have your developers write this actual piece of Java code. But at the end, you're going to have a component that someone like an ETL developer could drag and drop around and use as needed. So we're going to go ahead and start this process and write to our actual Kafka topic. As you can see here, we're pushing cell, antenna, and router data to the same topic. I get animation showing me along the way what this looks like, and a confirmation that everything worked out okay, right? So then I'm actually going to just read that topic, just parse it really quickly, just to see what's in it, and just send it to a flat file. Again, we made a Kafka reader subgraph, so I'll just click into it to show you guys what that looks like. It's just a little bit different. It's pretty simple. There's just a little piece of Java code here that looks like this. Again, we're connecting using both Clover APIs and Kafka APIs to create this neat little drag and drop component that we can use to modify and read and write from Kafka topics. And then we're just going to send that to a flat file using a flat file writer component. So I'm going to run this one as well, just to show you guys what that looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and run through, and I have 2,394 different messages in that actual Kafka queue that I pulled out. So from there, we're going to go ahead and go to our more complicated use case that I had described earlier. Essentially what we're doing here is using that same Kafka reader, grabbing those different Kafka messages, and then partitioning and routing that data dynamically to each one of those different use cases that I described. So the cell data is going to go to a lookup join component that's going to actually perform that database lookup on our different regions. And I'll show you guys what that looks like in a second. And we're going to actually write that at the end to a PostgreSQL database. The next one being the router data is just going to be parsed out into a column format and then actually sent to another application via payload, an HTTP payload. The third one is going to be our antenna data, which we're actually just going to grab that information, aggregate, and then do a simple report on failure rates, essentially showing how many antennas failed versus how many antennas didn't fail. So I'm going to go ahead and run this now. And it's actually incredibly fast. A lot of times, a lot of the questions that we get are, well, Kafka, if you're pushing very large volumes of data, can you have a tool that keeps up with it? And the great thing with us is that everything here is done in parallel. And especially as you can scale up and down dynamically, you can have all this processing done incredibly quickly. So I read 2,800 records in a couple seconds. So as you can see here, we have the cell data. It has different metadata information, but it starts off as a region, many different regions, and then it gets as a binary, or sorry, as a numerical representation. And with the lookup, we're actually going to have the actual region name attached to it as well. So if you have like an analyst looking at this sort of data, it's a lot easier for them to read in like a human readable format, for example. With this router data, we're getting in this raw content, like just the string of the actual message. We're going to parse that out into column format and then send via payload to our different application. With our antenna data, we have different timestamps, distance to tower, but what we're really interested in is failures and how many antennas failed versus how many antennas didn't fail. So I'm going to use a simple aggregation component to just tell me how many failed and how many didn't fail. So here you can see 615 did fail and 585 did not fail. That's just a quick little example to show you guys the sort of things that you can do with Kafka in CloverDX. We're actually flexible in that you can create these components and really run your traditional ETL processes, the sorts of things that you're used to, in very quickly to keep up with the amount of data that's being pushed to these different queues. Now, this whole thing that I showed you is a job that I designed in our design environment, and I'm testing and debugging here. But now I'm going to go ahead and show you guys our runtime environment and show you what that looks like. So we go through it. So this is CloverDX Server. This is our runtime environment. It's a piece of software that gives you a web GUI, essentially a command center where you can look at all the different jobs being run. So as you can see, there's like a health and status of all these different jobs. It lets me know my utilization, how often these jobs are being run. And every job that we run here at CloverDX is going to have an actual execution history. So as you can see in the last couple minutes, I ran 3 different jobs. And as I was speaking earlier, we want something that's auditable and easy to follow. Every single one of those components, those drag and drop pieces that I showed you in the screen, has a report alongside of it, a tracker that shows you how many records were fed in, how many records were outputted. So it essentially allows you to utilize the real power of Kafka, pushing data records into topics and out via consumers, but allows you to get a good sense and understanding of how many records are being pushed, the different processes that are being done. If any errors come along the way, it'll also bring that to your attention as well. We also have log files for each one of those different processes. So instead of kind of pointing a Kafka reader at a topic and hoping for the best that you read everything in, this way we can make sure and make reports, especially if you're looking at using Kafka at enterprise level, making sure that everything was processed and done correctly as needed as well. So that's all I really had to show you guys for today in regards to Kafka. Feel free to drop any questions here in the chat. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Calvin. I do have a question that's come in, so I'm going to throw that over to you. So someone has asked, if this is not in Clover, how do I get access to it?
So we actually here at Clover created this little piece of software. What we're going to do is actually after the webinar, email out a link so you guys can kind of play with this and get familiar with what that feels like, along with the video and sort of how-tos.
I've got another question that's come in, Calvin. Do we migrate database from one to the other? Someone has asked.
Yes, we definitely have components that can do that via readers and writers. If you're asking about using Kafka to do that, like I said, you can probably have a Kafka connector to one database, and we can parse that out and send it to another one. But we do any sort of ETL process that you can think of, migrations or some sort of data warehousing. We do all of that as well.
Okay, great. Thanks for the questions. I guess if there aren't any more, we'll wrap up. But if you do have any that come in later on, please just send them to the email hello@cloverdx.com and we'll make sure Calvin gets them. So thanks, Calvin, for a really interesting webinar, and thanks everyone for attending. The recording and slides will be in your inbox soon, and we hope to see you at our next webinar.